Welcome to another video. This is Dragagon again. In this video we're going to go over the scout tank changes and what's being added to the scout tank. Because scout tank got quite some changes compared to before 40.0. I won't be going over all the rubies and talent tree anymore. I'll try to speed things up by just explaining the gameplay and then display the rubies and the talent points as I explain to keep you informed. If you still have any other questions after the video, make sure to put them in the comments down below. I'll answer. I'm checking weekly and I'll try to help what I can. And the build and stats will be in the video description down below as well. So starting with the simple gameplay, we're gonna go step by step. First off, you wanna be always with tank aspect, of course. And don't forget your combatant stance. That is something very unique to the scout tank. All the tanks don't have that. So when you start, basically you're going to be focusing on your poison charms all the time together with avalanche and shady strike. That's gonna be your main DPS rotation. Poison charm with shady strike is going to apply the deadly poison effect, which is a big dot, and poison charm with avalanche is going to apply multiple stacks of the weak poison effect. This can stack up to 12 times. So you want to keep focusing on keeping those active. Now the first step they changed that they added to the scout tank is that they removed the cast bar of these melee abilities, because these were like channel abilities before, and they've removed it, so it's much easier now to rotate this stuff. So you want to keep track of your stacks here and you want to keep alternating them. You can poison charm and shady strike to refresh the timer of the deadly poison, but once you reach 12 stacks on the weak poison you cannot refresh it anymore. You gotta let it run out so that you can reapply it. But the timer refreshes every time you reapply the weak poison as well, until 12 stacks, and then you let it expire, but you can always keep the deadly poison active for sure. While you're doing this, try to spam your swing out off cooldown as well, because it's going to give you 6-second duration with only 5 seconds cooldown, so you can have this permanently all the time. I believe mine is only rank 2. If you want it easier, you can have it rank 3, that way the cooldown will be even less and you'll have an easier time of looping your swing out. Swing out is going to increase your dodge chance by 30%, which is something you really need for scout tank, because you'll be dodging a lot of incoming hits. Alright, once you got that down, I'm going to explain the next ability, which is Assassination Attempt. Assassination Attempt is more like a CC ability to me, but you can also use it as a DPS rotation. Now it has a long cooldown, 23 seconds, that's why I prefer to have it ready for a CC rather than a DPS. But if you want to push DPS, because you know you're not going to need to do any CC, because for example a red boss, a red ring, you can set CC. You can do Poison Charm as well with Assassin Attempt. It's going to apply a preparation buff, and when you apply the next attack with a Poison Charm, it's going to interact with that and explode. It's going to deal a lot of damage from that explosion. That's simply it. So basically your DPS rotation is all about Poison Charm and keeping your dots up. Alright, next up we have the Guild Keepers. I'm going into easy mode to try and show you guys the gameplay of the scout tank, what you gotta be paying attention for, so I don't get super high hits. Because in the end, you will need some healer at some points where a water tank doesn't, but scout tank is shining on different aspects. Now before you go in, I always pop my swing out as well together with my replenishment to get my gears really quickly. And I go with the Cobra Dash. Now this is a habit because Cobra Dash used to have a mitigation. When you would use it, you'd have like 35% less taken for 4 seconds. They have removed those now, so that's quite sad. But it's still a good way to move around the area with these two abilities. Recoil is jumping you backwards, and Cobra Dash jumps you to the target. It's basically the charge of the scout tank. Before we go in as well, I always pop my Poison Charm so I can apply something, and then right after I have the cooldown ready. Always good to do that. So starting, we're gonna go in and try to focus on the DPS rotation, and you see that damage is going through my barriers. Damage is basically coming in and then has a 7 seconds delay before it comes out and actually damages me. During that 7 seconds you have about a few abilities that you can use to work with that damage. As you can now notice, I'm using my Frost Charms to use the defensive abilities, and I'm using my Poison Charms for the offensive abilities. Now what does Frost Charm do with Will to Live? It's going to reduce your incoming damage by 10%, so all the damage that comes in after you use Will to Live with the Frost Charm will be reduced. And my Frost Charm with Deceiver of Death is going to apply a shield on me and the whole party based on some percentage of the highest damage counter in my barrier. So this one's the highest right now. If I use Frost Charm, this one with Deceiver of Death, it's always going to take the highest damage counter in your barrier, completely delete it, and it's going to take 8% of the damage that's been negated and give it as a shield to the whole party. So what Deceiver of Death does by default, it simply restores the greatest damage in my barrier and simply deletes it. With the Frost Charm, it's going to make it also that it takes 8% of that damage counter and gives it as a shield to the whole group. Now what Will to Live does on its own, reduces the incoming damage by 40%, so that's why it's a good thing to always wait for the damage to come at the end, right before it hits you, and then use Will to Live, so it can grab most of the damage counters that is hitting your barriers. So it reduces 40% of all the damage counters of the first 3.6 seconds that is coming in. So what Frost Charm does with Will to Live, it's going to apply a passive on the Will to Live buff, so as long as you have Will to Live active, you'll be taking 10% less damage into your barriers. Now there is something much more I prefer than that, and that is where it gets tricky. It's also using Poison Charms on your Will to Live. Instead of the 10% mitigation, you'll be getting a 15% higher dodge chance. Combine that with your Swing Out, which is already applying 30%, you're almost at half. And when you apply your Smoke Cloud on the floor, it's giving you another 20% dodge chance, so you're well over 50%. If you use Poison Charm with Deceiver of Death instead of the Frost Charm, instead of a shield, you'll be healing yourself for 10% of the damage dealt, which is quite handy if you don't have a healer, and it can help you heal up. Dropping Smoke Cloud periodically off cooldown is also a really good idea. It's going to heal you by 3% per second for 8 seconds, which is quite a huge heal compared to the other tanks. I think it's the best heal, self-heal a tank has next to the Warrior. Warrior has it permanently, 1.5% per second. The Scout has it 3% per second for only 8 seconds. But you also get another 20% dodge chance while you're in the cloud, so that's helping you a lot to dodge everything. So you're basically taking minimal damage in the cloud while healing up mostly. So I would suggest that you would get used to Poison Charm with Will to Live, because obviously the dodge chance is a lot better than the mitigation, because when you do dodge, you reduce the incoming damage by 100% and it never goes in your barriers. And if you're playing without a healer, then it's good to Poison Charm Will to Live. If you have a healer, it's better to use Frost Charm with Deceiver of Death, because it's going to apply the whole shield on your group and yourself as well. As you can see now, everything is dodging while I'm in Smoke Cloud, because the dodge chance is so high. It's a good thing to see your damage barriers empty. And that is basically how the abilities work to tank. So you got Will to Live and Deceiver of Death. Next up, I want to explain some utility we have as a scout tank. Now, utility is always important to have. It makes or breaks the tank. Every tank can do some damage and take aggro and stay alive. But utility is what differentiates the tanks, and it's good to know what utility you have. So first thing of the scout tank is the mass vulnerability. For that we'll be using Fire Charm together with Caltrops. It's going to trigger a Ruby, and it's going to apply a vulnerability on everything, at the same time knock them down. Every time they do get knocked down, the vulnerability refreshes. So it's very good to do that and then move a bit, so that when they chase you again, they're going to be knocked down on the floor. So it's a vulnerability NCC in 1, which is very handy for compass mobs, clearing packs quickly. It's basically the same as the Warrior's Mighty Leap, which applies vulnerability effect as well, but instead of the knockdown effect, the Warrior has a slow effect. Now it does take quite some abilities here. It takes 3 for me. I'm using Deceptive Maneuver as well to pull them in, so I don't miss anything out. So you can do it without, but then you have to move out around a bit to get them over, and you might miss the second knockdown tick. So you might miss the vulnerability extension, because some mobs are not moving or are ranged. Especially when they're ranged, they won't move, so you gotta pull them in. That way they still get knocked down on the Caltrops. So that's utility number 1. Utility 2 is of course the long CC. The cast time in this build is really long, so I would suggest you to have it precasted at all times. You can precast it and there's nothing else to precast, so it's good to have it all the time and precast it while you're waiting for certain things. Also, animation is so badass. Next thing we have as utility is the Racial Paralyzing Arrow. This is my favorite racial. There is a better ratio here that is called distraction. This is increasing your dodge chance by another 20% for 10 seconds. But since it's only 10 seconds for 1 minute cooldown, it's even a worse uptime than Smuggler has. I think like you don't really need it because you might only need it when you really need it, but then it's very situational, and I'd rather have paralyzing arrow ready to simply CC and interrupt certain mobs in comp passes, because when you do some comp passes you will realize that interrupting monsters is really important to save your party, and in that way you're also tanking, because the main job of tanking is to keep your party safe so the party can keep clearing monsters and you keep them safe by taking the hits. They avoid taking the hits by interrupting whatever they're casting. So another utility that we have is what I was explaining before with the assassination attempt. I was showing this in DPS rotation, but now I'm going to show this as a CC. So I do Frost Charm with the assassination attempt. It's going to apply this Frost Reef effect. So when I do another attack with the Frost Charm, it's going to apply a stun and a slow on them both. Now the slow is automatically because you apply a slow every time you do Frost Charm with the normal attack. The stun came as an explosion effect from assassination attempt, so that's why I'm using it mostly as a CC. And it's hard to time, like when you are seeing something happen and then you're gonna build up that thing, you're kind of stuck on your Frost Charm cooldown, so you might be too late. But I'm using it often on monsters that I know that they're gonna do it at some point, so I already prepare it up, and you have this 10-second range of where they might do it. It's worked well for me, and as the more you do some comp passes, you'll start to learn the patterns and you'll know exactly when they will do certain attacks so that you can interrupt it on time. Another utility that the Scout Tank has is Plantain. Plantain has been buffed quite a lot compared to before. Just having higher ranks is only reducing the cooldown, so I'm only having it on rank 1 for now because I don't have the rubies left. It's a self-heal of 30%, so it's very nice, and it's even more because it scales with survivability. Again, a lot of new things like Smoke Cloud is also scaling with survivability, so all these changes to the tank is very nice, and survivability is now very useful to have instead of the Bloodlust, because we'd play with Bloodlust before and then focus on damage to heal that up. But since they have introduced a Bloodlust penalty on all tanks that take more stamina rubies, you simply have to go the way to go with survivability, which is a good change. And there's a change coming that where people are saying just don't take the Bloodlust penalty rubies and play with Bloodlust. There's a change coming where they simply give the penalty to every class with the tank aspect. So as soon as you're in the tank aspect, you have the penalty already, and it's gonna be removed from the rubies. So there's no use avoiding it. You're gonna get it eventually, so you might as well get used to it. Another utility is the Warp Mystery I have here, which is very similar to the Warrior. Warrior has Mad Leap and is a charge with a knockdown. Scout has just exactly the same. So you just charge it and it's a knockdown effect. It's another interrupt. Like I say, a lot of interrupts are very useful to have for comp passes. It's very important to have them, so make sure you get used to them. Try to hardwire them in your brain so that you know you have those toolkits available. I believe every tank role has the same Warp Mysteries. It's either a CC break and immunity for PvP, and it's a charge with a CC. I believe Paladin has it as well, but I can't figure the name right now. And interestingly enough, Demo does not have one, so that's quite interesting. But Demo is a special case because of all the switch forming and stuff. Another utility that we have is the Riddance effect. It's called Helplessness. It's basically whenever you do Avalanche, you'll get a Riddance effect, which is shown in your buffs here. Riddance. It only stacks up to 1 time, but it refreshes all the time when you do it, and it's going to allow you to use Helplessness on them, which is also an interrupt. It's not a long CC, but it's still an interrupt. It interrupts monsters from casting stuff. You can have it higher rank if you want less cooldown and longer CC duration, but I only have it rank 1 because I rather have something rather than to invest too many rubies into it, because as you can see my build is already lacking some rubies for the Scout Tank. So Scout Tank has really some good space for flexibility, and you can change things around. Where we look at the Warrior Tank, all rubies already put in place and you still have plenty left over, so there's not much else to space for creativity, I would say. Another thing I wanted to say is that about dodging, as I explained before with all the increased dodge chances, whenever you dodge, you do self-heal and your party a lot, especially when in tank spec, so dodging is really your priority here as a Scout Tank gameplay, because they have a lot of passives proccing when you dodge certain attacks. But that's about everything, guys, that I wanted to tell you. I hope this was a helpful video and got you ready for scout tanking. I'm sure some of you will like it. I'm sure some of you will not like it. I know the scout tank can be an intimidating class and has a very fast gameplay with the 2 charms, of rather 3 charms gameplay with combining the attacks. Guys, I want to thank you so much for now. If you're still watching, I hope this video was helpful, that you now learned a bit more about scout tank, and if you want to try it, you have this as a reference point. Next up is the paladin tank I'll be covering, and I'll try to make also the pages on dragalots.com with the classes section, so that all of this is shown there and explained as well. Thank you guys again for watching, have a good evening, and goodbye.